I'm at United Autosports. I'm approximately 3 hours to the north of London in Yorkshire, and this operation houses a very big international sports car racing team where they run cars in England, throughout Europe and transatlantic across the other side of the ditch as well in North America. Now these guys, Zak Brown, who's the Chief Executive Officer of McLaren Formula One, and his business partner Richard Dean, have got a very special collection of cars inside. I've been given a private invitation to take a very special tour. Everywhere you look, there's iconic race cars. This is like a 3D library of the history of international motorsport. And the deal for Zak here is that every car in here either has to have won a race or a championship, or maybe have some very special and iconic story attached. For example, and I rest my case, Your Honour, check it out, 1981 Ayrton Senna car. He ran this in the World Championship. He finished in 4th position, and remembering this is the start of one of the most brilliant motor racing careers, 3 World Championships, 41 race wins, 65 pole positions. And normally his 1991 McLaren V12 sits in here, but it's off on display at the moment. But just look at it. '87 Williams Honda FW11, driven by Nigel Mansell to second in the World Championship, second to his Brazilian teammate Nelson Piquet. Now the story, the big story behind this car is power. And Dickie Stanford, who was the team manager for Williams Honda back in the day, he's down in the corner office there together with Paul Haig, they look after all of this, told me that they'd wind this thing up to 1,200 horsepower for qualifying. Remembering it's a tiny 1.5 litre V6 Honda engine, wind it up to 1,200. They'd turn it down to the measly figure of 900 horsepower. Ridiculous performance. Now this car won 3 times and took 5 pole positions, and they've marked the success just inside the tub here, just to the left of where Nigel sat. Way too many late nights watching this thing. On the topic of Nigel the Lion, this story here is pretty cool. So Mansell won the World Championship in 1992 in convincing style in the Williams, and then he got a bit fed up politically with Formula One, couldn't get a deal together, so he went and drove in North America in the IndyCar Championship, and he drove for the cigar-smoking Carl Haas and actor Paul Newman in the Newman-Haas team. And this is the car that he drove, 1993 Lola, beautiful thing. Just a gorgeous race car. Now, incredibly, he won the championship on debut and became a huge hero in America, because very few people have ever been able to adapt from one series to the other, and especially back to back. He won races and grabbed pole positions. He very nearly won Indy that year. Now, on that topic, this is a 1991 Rick Mears car, and what a beautiful thing it is. It's a Penske. Now, back in the day, Roger and his group used to actually build these cars here in the UK, and the operation was run by a fellow called Teddy Mayo. I actually got to work with his son Tim at one stage. Strange how the world's only separated by a handful of degrees. So the brother of the fellow that ran this operation, Tim Mayer, was really sadly killed in an accident at Longford in Tasmania, right by where we operate at Symmons Plains Raceway. And as it always is with the Penske machine, this is just an object of supreme beauty. And I can even see the Penske Cars Pool UK placard in here. Now, the other thing that's ironic is that Rick Mears to this day is mentoring and looking after our very good friend Scott McLaughlin and last year's champion in IndyCar, Will Power. This is familiar turf. Check the names out. Nick Percat, Garth Tander. We worked with Garth to this very day. Back in 2011, a very young and very green Nick Percat jumped aboard the Holden Racing Team Commodore with the veteran who'd already won the race in Garth Tander. and they picked up another victory. For Garth, he'd already actually tasted it, but for Nick, what a story. Did it on debut at Mount Panorama, so it's bizarre to come to the UK and find that Zach owns and operates and runs this car. I think I've actually driven that thing. So have a look at this though. This is one of the most beautiful and most beautifully presented race cars that you'll ever see. There's only a handful of these in the world. It's a Cosworth-powered Cologne Capri. I think it's called RS3100 or something like that. And I'm not 100% sure of the sound that Angels make, but if I kind of interpret it properly, this makes that sound. It is the most beautiful sounding race car. Niki Lauda drove one of these things, a big long toilet roll list of heroes that have driven them. But amazingly, Alan Moffat also spent time, and I can recall watching one of these cars at Sandown as a youngster. Heart rate. Beautiful race car. This is the tub of one of the most famous race cars of all time. It is a McLaren Can-Am M8D. Can-Am, Canadian American Challenge Cup. Now these cars had a 7.6 litre gigantic engine on the back of them, and they were just ridiculously, insanely powerful. Driven by Dan Gurney, American, and Peter Gethin, a Pom, and unbelievably successful, remembering that Bruce McLaren also drove these cars. This is from 1970, the year that sadly Bruce was killed in that accident at Goodwood, and my good late friend Denny Holm also drove the later versions of these cars to great success. And this is an iconic sports car as well. This is the Jaguar XJ10 IMSA program. These cars are actually designed by Ross Brawn, who basically has been in the recent period running Formula One. Martin Brundle and a great long list of drivers drove for Tom Walkinshaw in the TWR campaign. They drove in North America in the IMSA Championship. They also drove in the Silk Cut Jaguars here in Europe. And they cleaned up everything. There was some amazing stories about the performance of these cars. In fact, my old Holden Racing Team teammate from the inaugural days when we first got HRT started drove one of these, or a derivative, and on the Mulsanne Straight at Le Mans, the car was good for 400 kilometres an hour. It's just a beautiful car. I've snuck upstairs and found the bodywork of the M8D. Doesn't it look absolutely stunning? Little story that I forgot to tell you downstairs was that Supercars Hall of Famer Jim Stone also worked at McLaren in that period, and that'll make Jimmy's heart race. Now just alongside here is a Chev Monza of significance for Australian motorsport as well, because Alan Moffat won the Australian Sports Sedan Championship in this car. The Monza was the go-to toy back in the day, and in fact if you go back into the mid-80s, remember that Bob Jane had one, Peter Brock drove one as well. This car was run on a couple of occasions in North America. He ran it at Mid-Ohio near Mansfield, just outside Columbus, Ohio, my old hometown. He also ran it in Daytona, and then he brought it down to Australia and did some winning down there. A lot of fond memories. And up here you get more of a sense of the restoration that goes on. So there's not only the cars that Zach owns, but there's the cars that he jointly owns with his business partner here in United Autosports in Richard Dean, who is also a very successful driver. And they also have some customer cars as well. I'm actually going to try and sneak this into my back pocket. Zach won't be aware, because that for me is just a killer, iconic car to have. Nothing to do with racing, just a nice thing to have in the garage. So there's a heap of guys running around here, a big team doing all kinds of work, and stop and think about the fact that you can't just rock up to your local Repco and buy spare parts. You've got to actually manufacture stuff. You've got to cadge it from every corner of the universe. They run all these cars. This is an old Dale Earnhardt car. And in fact, Daniel Ricciardo drove that as a part of the deal that he had with Zach and driving McLaren. Seriously, there's a gazillion stories to tell here. I could make a documentary out of this stuff, but I want to say thank you to Zach for allowing us to just take a sneak peek inside. I'm just going to disappear for a few hours now.